Today we're at FDR's little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia. This small 3-bedroom, 2-bath house was built by FDR back when he came down here to try to find relief from the polio that he suffered through. And while he didn't find a cure, he did find relief in the Warm Springs around here. There's a guest house over here to the side where people that can come visit him. There's a bump gate where he used to drive his car through. He used to drive all around rural Georgia, actually, and he was very much in touch with his neighbors, and he got along with the people, and people would come here and stay on the property to visit him. A lot different than you would picture something that you would see with a president nowadays. But we're going to go inside, and we're going to tour the house, so come along with us. Roosevelt first started coming to Warm Springs in 1924 after being stricken with polio 3 years prior, hoping to find a miracle cure. One of his cars, a 1940 Willys convertible, was a gift from the Willys Overland Company of Toledo and presented to him by his brother-in-law. Shortly thereafter, Willys received the contract to build Jeeps for the military. The museum has a wheelchair and leg braces used by FDR. There's a great museum before you head to the Little White House, filled with a large collection of personal items and gifts from the many admirers of his. You'll also find exhibits centered around life in the United States at the time of his presidency, along with his accomplishments. These table and chairs sat on the raised back patio where he could sit and work while looking out over the property and listen to the stream running just below. He was also an avid stamp collector, stating, "I owe my life to my hobbies, especially stamp collecting." This handmade sailing ship has the year 1933 on it, the year he was first elected to the presidency.
During his visits, Roosevelt would take to the back roads, driving himself in a car that was specially equipped with hand controls he had designed.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking, to talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be.
In the 1930s, only around 10% of rural Americans had access to electricity, while nearly 90% of those living in cities did. In 1935, FDR signed an executive order to establish the Rural Electrification Administration to provide low-interest loans to co-ops of farmers to construct an electric infrastructure to bring electricity to rural America. By 1953, these farmers had access to electricity just as easily as those living in the cities. This vast collection of canes belonged to FDR during his battle with polio. Most of these were given to him as gifts. FDR's stagecoach, the Warm Springs, came with his purchase of the property in 1927. After being elected governor of New York, staff and patients rode in it in a triumphal parade, some even dressed as George and Martha Washington. On either side of the house's bump gate sits a guardhouse, one for the Secret Service agent and another for the Marine on duty. The bump gate allowed FDR to easily open the gate without getting out of his car by gently bumping it. There are three other notable structures built on the property during Roosevelt's time here. The garage and servants' quarters was for the household staff on duty 24 hours a day while the president was here. This two-bedroom, one-bath living area above the garage housed Miss Daisy Bonnet, the maid and cook, and Irvin McDuffie, the president's personal valet, and his wife Lizzie. Miss Daisy lived in town and only stayed here when the president was in town. The rest of the time she was employed by others, but agreements with them allowed her duties to Roosevelt to take precedent. Irving's wife Lizzie had been the Roosevelt's maid for years, starting in Hyde Park, New York, and then Albany when Roosevelt served as the governor of New York. It should be noted that while these quarters had a toilet and sink, there was no bathing facilities. The staff's bathing facilities were located in the basement of the main house. These were removed in the late 1940s when the basement became a museum. Between these two structures is a brick patio with a walk down to the main house's front door. Across from the servants' quarters is the guest house. Completed in 1933, many prominent government officials, including cabinet members and visiting dignitaries, stayed here. Although it is known these various important visitors stayed here, there is no known records of who exactly they were. The house has an entryway, living room, and a bedroom with twin beds and a bathroom. It was heated by a fireplace in the winter and cooled by fans in the summer. The president's love of the sea and sailing is shown here as well through the decor and paintings. The third notable structure on the property is a cottage that served as the home of Georgia Wilkins, built in 1934. The Wilkins family were the original owners of the property. When the museum exceeded the space of the main house's basement, it was Georgia's house that became the museum. Aside from these three buildings from the time when Roosevelt frequented the property are several guard shacks and sentry posts for the Marines and Secret Service that protected the president. Small and discreet, several can be seen surrounding the house and setting out in the woods. The house's kitchen looks modest by today's standards, but for the 1930s, especially a rural kitchen in the Great Depression, this kitchen would have been considered elegant. The biggest reason being electricity and many modern for the times appliances, including a waffle iron, an electric stove, and oven. Right off the kitchen and before you enter the main living areas of the house is the butler's pantry with a rather nice collection of dishes, glasses, and serving platters. As you enter the main living area of the house, you are immersed in a rustic, rural home from the 1930s. The exposed wood walls are golden in color and hand-hewn wood rafters show the marks from the craftsmen. Although these were said to be added after the fact when Roosevelt felt the smoothness of them didn't convey the rustic look he was after. Here he could relax by the stone fireplace or entertain his guests. More exposed wood for the walls and numerous bookshelves flank the fireplace. The home's main decor is sailing related. From paintings to replica wooden ships, this is evident again in the dining room with more ships and a painting of John Paul Jones, the father of the American Navy. This chair and table is where he would conduct his business as the president. His disability limited his use of a desk, and this table and chair arrangement offered him the ability to relax and rest his legs. Nearly the entire west-facing wall of this room is windows and French doors which open to the back patio. From here, the president had an unobstructed view of the woods and Pine Mountain. He would sit out here occasionally to work and take his meals. Off of the living room is a small interior hallway and exterior entrance that leads to Roosevelt's personal secretary's quarters and one of the home's bathrooms. FDR's bedroom was off the dining room and also had an exterior doorway to the patio. His room had a desk for him, but he spent most of his time working at this chair in the living room. Above his bed is a button to summon any of the many people to his aid, if needed. Between these two bedrooms is the home's main bathroom. The tub and toilet were altered to accommodate his disability. The other bedroom belonged to Eleanor. Because Eleanor didn't always travel with him to the home, her bedroom served as a guest room for his grandchildren when they visited. The entrance area for the home is rather large, especially for a 1,300 square foot home. This tapa cloth, also known as bark cloth, is made from the inner bark of the paper mulberry tree. Soaking it and beating it softens the bark, where it is then made into thin sheets used for clothing, linens, and floor coverings. This one was presented to President Roosevelt in 1934 by the Hawaiian Territory's territorial governor. The linen closet was located in the entrance area as well. Fala, a Scottish Terrier, was FDR's faithful companion and outlived him by 7 years. A statue of Fala beside Roosevelt is featured in Washington, D.C.'s Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial, the only presidential pet so honored. A few miles away from the Little White House are the Warm Springs pool frequented by FDR. It was here that he hoped to find a cure for his polio. While he didn't find a cure, he did find relief. The exhibit is dedicated to telling the story of polio, its effects on a person, and Jonas Salk's vaccine. These pools are where Roosevelt would seek relief. The warm, mineral spring water that flows at a constant 88 degrees was thought to offer relief from this and other ailments, so much so that a resort sprang up around it. The warm water was not the miracle cure Roosevelt sought, but it did bring relief and improvement. In 1927, he bought the resort and the surrounding 1,700 acres and established the Georgia Warm Springs Foundation, later renamed Roosevelt Warm Springs Vocational Rehabilitation Campus. He knew firsthand the challenges of living with polio and wanted every survivor to receive the therapy and the training they needed to live as independently as possible. His last visit to Warm Springs would come near the end of World War II, in March of 1945. Feeling he couldn't get enough rest at his Hyde Park, New York home, he left for his Little White House. According to some at Warm Springs, Roosevelt looked ghastly, and his usual cordial waves to the residents were weak. He even avoided swimming in the pool where he found so much relief during previous visits. Recently returned from the Yalta Conference, where he met with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and General Secretary Joseph Stalin to discuss the post-war reorganization of Europe, he planned on working on his speech to open the United Nations Conference. He entertained neighbors and two important guests, Philippine President Sergio Osmena, where he gave assurances regarding future independence, and Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau. On Thursday, April 12th, his plans included an afternoon barbecue given by his Warm Springs friends and a minstrel show at the hospital. He woke that morning at 9:20 and had a light breakfast. He complained of a mild headache and stiff neck. A massage seemed to ease the pain in his neck. Even in the warm, humid climate, the president seemed chilled and asked for a naval cape to drape over his shoulders. As he sat seated in his favorite chair by the fireplace, casually reading newspapers and composing letters, artist Madame Elizabeth Shumatoff worked on a portrait she had been commissioned to do. She started around noon, and at 1 o'clock, the president remarked, "We have about 15 minutes more to work." With that, his head slumped forward, and he was unable to raise it. When questioned what was wrong, he raised his left hand to the rear of his head and whispered, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head." With those words, the president lost consciousness and was carried into his bedroom and laid on his bed. Though the doctors worked on him, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our 32nd and longest-serving president, passed away at 3:35 that afternoon. The house and buildings standing during his time remain in the same state as when he died. While we may all disagree with his policies and accomplishments, he led the United States through two of the greatest crises of the 20th century, the Great Depression and World War II. He greatly expanded the powers of the federal government with his New Deal. He created the Civilian Conservation Corps to relieve unemployment during the Depression and to conserve and protect the natural resources of the United States. And the creation of Social Security, among many other programs, either started or expanded during his presidency.